So, good morning to you out in the internet and in the room here. Um, so, Mike is here. Good morning to you, and Kevin is here. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Shania. Michaela is here. Good morning, Michaela. And Ananda's here. Good morning. And Ayushi, good morning to you. And Rayan is here too. Good morning or good evening to you. So we started a couple minutes late there. If you're online, we were just talking about what people did on the weekend, and it seems people had a sad weekend of working and doing homework and studying, but we have a long weekend next weekend. So this coming week there'll be no class on Mondays, so you'll get a 3-day weekend, which is maybe what we should all have all the time, 3-day weekends. On Friday, we were talking about the rise of Hitler, right? And so we talked about the fact that he's a significant historical figure, right? He is still he's still part of our cultural exchange and sort of cultural memory. Even, well, what are we talking here? For almost 80 years after some of these events happened, right? Maybe even more. And so he's still a very prominent figure. In many cases, he is held up as kind of the epitome of evil. You can talk about the devil and Hitler in the same breath almost. And people, of course, get compared to Hitler all the time, rightly or wrongly. But we'll talk a little bit about him today. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Germany before we sort of transition into World War II. And in terms of World War II, I don't want to spend, as a heads up, I don't want to spend too much time on kind of the particulars and the battles and things like that. I think, personally, we don't have a ton of time in this class, so we can't get into the detail. Secondly, I kind of feel like the more important things for history are kind of what comes out of the war. So why the war starts in the first place, and then when it's over, what has changed and sort of what happened to people and countries in the process. And so a lot of the battles are, personally, I just don't find them that interesting. You can take classes at university though, like you can take a military history of Canada, and which I did take actually, and they dig deeply into, the warfare part of war. But in a class like this, I kind of just like to skip over the top of a lot of the details and the battles and the dates, and then this army advanced here, and I think that's in the broader arc of history, some of those things don't really make that much of a difference, but the broader outcomes do. So, but anyway, got off on a little bit of a tangent there. Right, so this guy, yeah, born in 1889, dies in 1945, although some people would like you to believe that he never died and he escaped, but I don't think there's any evidence for that. He's Austrian, we should probably point out, and so even though he had a strong kind of affiliation for Germany and the German people, he's actually not from Germany, he's actually from Austria to the south. We talked a little bit, what did we talk about on Friday? We talked a little bit about the situation that Germany found itself in the 1920s, and what was it like, sort of politically and economically and socially? What was going on in Germany? Capuche? Expand on that. What's capuche mean? They were broke. Yeah, they had no money, right? As did many of the Western European countries who had fought in the war. They'd poured massive amounts of resources into that war and were now pretty broke. What else? They were a mess. Expand on mess. Define mess.
Politically, they were a huge mess. No order, no stability.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to rise to power. This burns this. That carries out a coup here.
Right. Lots of political instability, right? Lots of attempted coups or putsches, overthrows of the government, right? Some of them temporarily successful, some of them not at all. So there's political instability, there's lots of violence, right? There's lots of political parties and people fighting in the streets. What else is happening?
The government just sold them out.
They were annoyed because what?
The government just like sold them out like to sign the.
Right. So the government that was in power, the Weimar government, a Republican government, not Republican like the US, but a democratic government. There's not a lot of love for that government at the time, right? So people had this idea that the government stabbed them in the back at the end of the war, that they surrendered Germany when Germany was on the cusp of victory, and then they were just about to win the war, and then their political leaders cowardly signed a peace treaty, and then they were stabbed in the back. Awful, right? But I don't think that's quite the case, but people believed it and were upset about it anyway. Okay, what else? What else is happening? Where's unemployment?
High.
How high?
Very high.
Off the charts kind of high.
It's pretty much off the, well, it's still on the chart, but in terms of unemployment in a country, yeah, it's really high, right? They're talking, in the text, they talk about 30, 40, 50%. And as I mentioned, that is off the charts, right? Because,
Shortages.
what's that?
Supply shortages.
Supply shortages, there's inflation, right? So in inflation, the value of currency deflates as the price of goods inflates, and so suddenly your weekly paycheck only buys a loaf of bread, right? Which is awful.
The military is strong.
Yeah, they have a small military, although I think the textbook may have mentioned it, but they were kind of breaking the rules a little bit already, right? They were kind of rotating people in and out of the military to make sure that more soldiers actually got trained. They were running sort of military drills in Russia that was kind of off the radar of the League of Nations kind of thing. So they were cheating a little bit in terms of the military, but it's true, their military was a lot smaller than it.
They were like in debt because they had to pay the reparation.
Right, they had to pay those reparations, billions of dollars, and where was some of the money coming from?
Whatever the original.
Right, so their first step was to confiscate a bunch of things from rich people and sell them off to pay the reparations. And how do rich people feel about that, do you think? Not so much. Whether you're rich or poor, nobody likes their stuff being confiscated by the government, right? But still, yeah, so the upper class, the land-owning class, is not a fan of the Weimar government either. So the people at the bottom are saying, hey, this government isn't doing anything for us. The people at the top are saying, hey, this government is stealing our stuff to pay reparations for a treaty that they shouldn't have signed in the first place because they stabbed us in the back. So they're not happy. Where's the money come from later?
Do they make fake money or something?
What's that?
Do they like print fake money?
No. What happens is, at the time, the amount of currency, the amount of like dollar bills that a country has is based on gold. And so however much gold your country has in the vaults, it prints an equivalent amount of money, right? And so all of that money, all of those little bills are guaranteed by the government because the government has gold in their storehouse. That changes a little bit later, but then the Americans start loaning money to the Germans, right? And so the Germans are like, great, we have more money, and they start printing a bunch off, but that's not a good, you want to be careful. You can't just print.
Oh, so they did print.
They did print more money, but you have to be careful how much currency you print, because if you print too much, it will deflate the value of your currency, and then it won't be, you'll wind up with it not worth anything at all, which is what happens in Germany. They print too much, too fast, and their currency drops, and suddenly people's money aren't worth anything. I don't have any in my PowerPoint slide, but there are pictures of the time from the time of kids playing in the streets with like stacks of bills, like real money, and it's like they've got stacks like, but it's not worth anything.
They were burning instead of like buying wood because it would have been cheaper for them.
Yeah, there's pictures of people, yeah, throwing their money into their wood burning stove because the wood is more expensive than the money, and so they're burning the money instead. So yeah, things are bad when people are throwing money into the furnace, right? And so yeah, it's pretty bleak, right? There's not a lot of jobs, there's not a lot of money, there's a lot of violence and political upheaval, and that stresses people out, right? People don't like. I think we can all agree, people don't like political instability, right? People like it when it's, things are moving along, the economy's going, maybe the government is incompetent or maybe they do silly things, but as long as they do a reasonably good job, people are happy, right? But this is a super stressful time economically, but also, you never know from one day to the next who's going to be in power, right? So again, it's a really desperate situation that Germany has found itself in, and part of the reason it finds itself in that situation is because of the Treaty of Versailles, right? Because the treaty was in part meant to punish Germany, right? That's what France wanted out of the treaty, and to some degree they got it. And I think we can agree that Germany is being punished here, right? Or is at the very least is suffering, right? And then of course enter this guy here. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do. I would like you to read this very short section of the textbook, okay? It's just 2 pages. It's just a couple of questions. I think I have it posted in Microsoft Teams, but I'm just going to check to make sure because I can't remember if I did it or not. I did not. Okay. So if you're in class here, I'll let you start reading this. If you are online, go to Microsoft Teams and I'll have it posted there in 60 seconds, okay? And so we'll read this and we'll answer the questions. Okay, good people. Let's talk about this. So here, I think one of the questions that's associated with Hitler, and one of the reasons why people like to talk about him still, is associated with the question, like, how could this happen, right? How, we know the end of the story already. We know there's a horrible genocide and it's awful. And people look back and say, how did this happen? How did a guy like this get the keys to Germany, right? How did that happen and why? And so in this section here, we see a couple of historians trying to make a few arguments, right? Trying to say that, the main reason, the most significant reason in Hitler coming to power was this thing or that thing or something else. And so I think there's three historians here, right? We've got Alan Bullock, we've got Taylor, and we've got Ritter is the third one. So what does Alan Bullock say about why did Hitler come to power in the first place? What is responsible for him gaining the position that he does? Say just a little louder. To help the economy. Yes, he definitely wanted to help the economy, and Germans wanted him to do that. That is very true. And spoiler alert, he does actually wind up doing that, right? He does help them out in that regard. But what's Bullock saying here is the main reason for the success of the Nazis. Huh?
Which one was
Bullock is the first one.
AJP?
No. Alan Bullock. He's right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What's he say?
But he says Hitler was charismatic.
He was charismatic. Yeah.
Charismatic, and he knew what his people wanted to hear. They just told him what they wanted to hear, and he won them.
Right. The person. So Bullock is saying the person responsible for Hitler's rise is actually Hitler, right? He was good at propaganda. He was a good public speaker. He kind of knew what people wanted to hear, and he had no problem telling them that, whether it was true or not, which we're experiencing now. But it was him, right? So Alan Bullock is saying it was Hitler. It was the guy came to power because of who he was, right? This good public speaker, good propagandaist. He's the reason why he comes to power. But what about Taylor? What is APJ Taylor? AJP Taylor? What does he say? It's a lot of initials. Just pick one. Just pick one, Taylor.
He says it's something like the history of Germany itself. It demanded such a guy to come to power.
Okay. So what was the kind of history of Germany itself? Okay, so Taylor is trying to make the case that, Hitler comes to power because of the kind of cultural background that the Germans have. So he says that the Germans are kind of militaristic, right? So they put a lot of faith in and value in and honor in their own military and their military actions. What else does he say? Say that one more time. What about democracy? Yeah, well, because Germany got a democratic government at the end of World War I, but the Germans didn't necessarily want one, right? And so Taylor here is kind of saying that, democracy wasn't really something that the Germans had a lot of experience with. They didn't like it very much, and they didn't want it, but they had it, they got it. And so the Germans really weren't fully participating in the democracy in the way that maybe a regular democracy would. They still looked at the chancellor, they looked at Hindenburg as kind of the military leader, right? The head of state. They still wanted to see the government as led by a single military type leader. That's what they still wanted to see. And so when the democracy was kind of faltering and it didn't work, the Germans were like, yeah, this doesn't work. We know that, right? And so when chancellors started ruling by decree, right, when they started just making decisions for themselves, the Germans weren't up in arms like, oh gosh, we're losing our democracy. They thought, finally, something's getting done because the guy in charge is doing what he's supposed to do, right? So again, we might look back at this sort of sequence of events as, you know, the decline of democracy, or how do you lose your democracy to an autocrat, right, to a dictator? And we might look at it that way, but at the time, the Germans were probably not seeing it that way. They were like, finally, we're getting out of this democracy BS. We're getting into, you know, somebody is going to take power and steer us where we need to go. And so, yeah, Taylor is saying that there's not really a, you know, the Germans are kind of had more experience with militarism, with single leaders, right? They had a Kaiser before that, and so they're really looking for a single leader. They're not really looking for a democracy. And so when things start to slide from democracy toward dictatorship, they're actually okay with it, right? We're looking at it today and we're like, oh no, democracy is losing. But again, the Germans probably wouldn't have thought that. They were like, oh, finally somebody's going to take charge here. And we're going to get what we, you know, we're going to get somewhere, which is interesting, right? What about the third guy, Ritter? I'm assuming these are guys. I really don't know for sure. Allen's probably a guy. Gerhard is definitely a guy. I wonder if AJP Taylor is a woman. Anyway, what does Ritter say?
He says the very reason the Nazi Party could exist was because Germany was a democracy. Because they were a minority party, and was it not because of the democratic being of the government, they would have been eliminated at the beginning. So democracy has a role to play in Hitler's rise, as it wasn't the military who brought him to power, but were the people they loved.
Right. So Hitler comes to power not through military means, not with a military coup, but he's elected democratically, right? And we mentioned that before, is that in the article about Trump, is that fascism and democracy are kind of, you know, they're opposed to each other, right? They're at opposite ends of what they, you know, their values are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. But fascism can really only come out of democracy. And so, in a way, Ritter is saying here, democracy has a role to play. No democracy, no fascism, right? Which, of course, if you're someone who likes democracy and thinks it's okay, that's something that's good to know, right? It's good to know that you can have, you know, you can have these elements come out of a democratic system if you are not careful, right? And so, yeah, so he's implicating democracy and the people themselves, right? Because democracy as a system allows the Nazi Party to exist, and then the people vote them in, right? The Nazi Party gains seats every year throughout the late 20s and early 1930s, to the point where they're the biggest party in the Reichstag, in the legislature, right? So a lot of people are supporting the Nazis. This is Michaela. Michaela says Hitler won because people genuinely supported him because they wanted a strong leader. Yeah, and so that's probably more in line with maybe a little bit of Taylor's argument, or maybe Ritter's argument as well. The idea that the people put Hitler into power, and again, his authoritarian tendencies are not frightening to the Germans. The Germans are accepting of that, right, because of their past and what they're used to. So yeah, that's definitely good. And Aishi also says here, oh, this is Ritter, says that he was very manipulative and swayed most of the public to his side. I think Aishi, I think that sounds a little more like Alan Bullock's argument, right? That it was, that he was a master manipulator, right? He was like a puppeteer, right? He was pulling all the strings, and he knew the right things to say to sway the public to go along with him, right? But the other two are not arguing that at all, right? The other two are saying, actually, the public was going that way anyway, and I think this is Taylor that says, of course Germany would produce a leader like this, right? Someone who is militaristic and, is, feels that they need to regain their place in Europe and take revenge for the Treaty of Versailles and, take control. Like, Taylor is saying that all of those things that many of the things that Hitler thought and felt and spoke to people about were things that lots of people were thinking about anyway. And so this is the thing, is if you go back in time with your Avengers Endgame space-time GPS, if you go back in time and you kill Hitler, someone like AJP Taylor would say, well, yeah, but somebody else would probably come to power, right? Someone similar to Hitler, someone who is autocratic and is a dictator and would, overturn the Treaty of Versailles and, start fighting with other nations. Something like that would happen anyway. Would you still have the Holocaust? I'm not sure about that. But Germany would still, the idea here is that Germany would still produce a leader like Hitler. And that's a similar thing to what's being said in the United States, right, about Donald Trump. Because a lot of people are asking the same question. How did we get this guy in the White House? How did he do it? Right? And so there's kind of two opposing arguments, right? Is it him? Is he a genius and he just knew how to play the system to get himself into the White House? Or is he representative of where America is at? Is he a reflection of what America is right now? Or at least part of it? And so that's the question. Does the leader steer the country, or does the country produce the leader that it wants, right? Does it push someone up the ladder based on what the people want, or based on what the sort of culture is at the time? I don't know. But there are a few different arguments here, right, to be had. Which, I know we haven't dug too far into this, but which one do you think is the strongest case? Which one do you think is kind of more, which one feels more true to you? And maybe not even so much in terms of Hitler, but based on your own experience. Ritter? Why Ritter, do you say?
Because he was Hitler himself, to take stock by Hitler. He was elevated by the people. They didn't like him. The guy knew what to say, so that's a factor, but they liked him, just pushed him off.
It's true, right? It's hard to argue with seats in the Reichstag, right? Seats in the legislature, because the only way that happens is through the people voting, right? So, yeah, there was support. There was a lot of support for Hitler, right? He had huge rallies of tens of thousands of people showing up to them, and people showed up, right? And people cheered, and lots of people did. The Nazi salute that I definitely won't do on camera or anywhere else. Lots of people were enthusiastically doing that. And again, it's going to take a turn. It's going to get darker, as we move into the 1930s and 40s. But when he's coming to power, the people support him. From what I know of people who interacted with him personally, many people didn't like him very much. And so he was apparently, I don't know, I'm going to show you a video in a bit, and this may be in there and it may not be. But apparently in public, like when he was on a stage in front of thousands of people, he was in his element. Okay, so he was very comfortable on the stage. He got very into it. He was a passionate speaker. He liked being up there. But in, kind of interpersonal exchanges, he was always really awkward and uncomfortable. And he often said inappropriate things or did inappropriate things to sort of throw other people off so that he wouldn't be so nervous. And so in a one-on-one situation, a lot of people didn't like him. A lot of people didn't find, he was not the kind of guy you would want to go and have a beer with, kind of thing. But on the stage, he was able to project a different image, and one that a lot of people only saw the stage version of Hitler, not the individual one. So kind of behind the scenes, a lot of people, didn't really like him very much, but when he got up on stage, he was able to transmit something that kind of resonated for people. What else do you think? Which one of these arguments feels more true to your own experience? I can wait a long time. I can wait until it becomes like so awkward.
Okay, Alan Block. You need to win.
Would you agree with me in saying that probably all of these historians have a point? They all have that to some degree their arguments are true. Yeah, and that's often the case with many things, but also with history as well. Is that depending on which things you place more importance on, multiple arguments can be true at the same time, right? And so all of the things that these three historians have said are true, right? He was definitely charismatic and a master of propaganda. He definitely came out of a culture that was very authoritarian, militaristic, and wanted revenge for the Treaty of Versailles. He definitely was elevated to his position through kind of grassroots, right? He was elected and the party gained power through democracy and through elections. All of those things are correct. And so really what the historians are arguing about here is what's the most important factor, right? What's the key ingredient in this recipe that if you remove it, it doesn't work, right? That Hitler doesn't come to power without this one thing. And maybe that's hard to say, but that's kind of the historian's job, right? Is to sort of, have you look at the past in a slightly different way, right? And again, some of these arguments may find more resonance or become more important depending on what's happening in sort of the world and society at the moment, right? So what's happening with Donald Trump in the United States, there's a question, we've talked about the fact, is he a fascist? But many people have asked the question, how do you get a guy like that in the White House? And, I think in this case, the argument of sort of the culture, sort of producing someone like Trump, I think that's a very kind of reasonable argument for what's happening down there. But it's not the only one. But again, I think, when we look at arguments like this, they are, especially when you're dealing with proper academics, there's often no right or wrong answer, right? It has to do with what do you find more significant, more compelling, or what makes more sense for you in the moment of history that you're living in, right? Okay, you want to take a little break? A little breaky? Okay. Take a little break, come back, and then we'll watch some documentary footage, okay? Okay? All right. Okay, so we are back. A couple of questions have come up about the paper, so I will address them. The first paper, or the first question that came up, was about how to submit it, and so I think Ryan, you asked that a little bit earlier. So, well, when you're done it, if you could please put it into a Word document, or if you use a Mac, you can do a Pages document if you're using that. Word or Pages is fine with me. And then just email it to me. That will be great.
It's not a must if it's in PDF.
What's that?
It's not a must.
It would be. I prefer it in Word. So because sometimes I like to.
As PDF.
No. Don't PDF it. Just Word or Pages. Because sometimes I might want to type something into it or highlight something or send it back to you, and it's easier if it's, yeah. So yeah, just send it in Word or Pages. That would be great. The second question that was asked is, can I give you a little more time? Do you need time?
Yes.
You do need time? Okay, can I give you another day? I'm gonna give you one more day, and that's it, because we've got to, we're already, is this week 4 or week 5 now? This is week 5? Yeah, we've got to get moving. So I'll give you one more day, but then I've got to get you handed in, because I've got to get it marked. I've got to return it to you so that I can assign you another one. So we've got to get moving. So I'll give you one more day, so you can hand it in to me by the end of the day on Wednesday. And so Wednesday is the 7th, right? End of the day Wednesday. Email it to me, and then I will mark it. Okay, so one more day, because as I say, we've got to get moving. Incredibly, time is flying by. I don't know how. Is the term going quickly for you guys, or slow? Quick? Yeah. That's what they always say, right? The days are long, but the years are short, or something like that. Okay, so one more day, hand it in to me, end of day Wednesday, in Word document or Pages document, either way. Pages is kind of cool. Do you use Pages, Rose? Do you use Pages on your Mac to write stuff?
I use the Word.
You use Word? Okay. Give Pages a try. It's really easy to use.
I don't have to use the pages.
You don't have to, or
I have.
you oh, you have?
I have to use it.
Oh, it took me a little while to figure it out, but I find it works better than Word. But
I will try.
whatever you want, it's your choice. Doesn't matter to me. Okay, let's go back. So we've been talking about how Hitler came to power. How does this happen? And there's probably multiple factors involved. And of course, historians will argue back and forth about what was more significant. You know, these things are difficult to know for sure, right? It's difficult to know, whether it was, the will of the people, or whether it was his charismatic personality, or was it equal parts of both, or was it 60-40 or 70-30, or it's, you can never really know for sure, right? But it gives historians jobs, and it gives them something to do, to argue back and forth about what was more important or what wasn't more important. But it's good for us to kind of have some different perspectives on him and what happened. So to that end, I would like to, I'm just going to jump ahead a couple, to here. So I'm not sure if they're going to mention this in the documentary. This is a different documentary than I've used in the past. So I had one, and I think this one might be better. So I'm going to try it out this time on you guinea pigs, and see how it is. So his backstory is kind of interesting. He comes from a family of his father and mother. His father apparently is a very stern kind of straight ahead, straight-laced government official. So his dad works in the Austrian government. His dad is a bureaucrat, and so he doesn't value thinking too much. He just does what he's told, and he feels that that's his job, is to just do what the government says. And young Adolf, like a typical teenager, is rebelling against his dad and saying, you don't know anything, Dad. So young Adolf and his dad sort of didn't see eye to eye. They were kind of always getting into conflicts. Adolf's mom really kind of doted over him. She'd had a few children before, but all of them had died. I think there's 3 or 4 kids that come before Adolf, but they all die in either in childbirth or when they're young children. And that was much more common at the time because, healthcare was not what it is today. And so, he was born in 1889, right? So you're looking at the late 1800s. So Adolf is the only child of this couple because the other children have died. And so she really spends a lot of her time kind of looking after him because he's the only one who's made it. And of course, she's had to suffer the loss of 2 or 3 children before him, which is quite tragic. He grows up, he leaves Austria, and he tries to enter art school in Vienna. So he goes to Vienna, he submits all of his portfolio and his drawings. If you've ever seen his drawings, they're actually not bad. He's actually a decent artist, but he doesn't get accepted to the art school. It's kind of a crushing blow for young Adolf. He's not really sure what he's going to do. He winds up getting sucked into World War I, and he fights for Germany, obviously. He is temporarily blinded, I think, in a gas attack, but he gets his sight back at the end of that. It's just temporary. And he comes out of it with a medal, a commendation of some sort for bravery. And and then he fails at art school. And then after the failure at art school, he's just kind of bumming around. So he's living in Vienna. His mom is sending him some money from home, and he's kind of just living in, he's living in the equivalent of a hostel or a basement suite. He's not really doing anything. He's just trying to figure out who he is and what he's going to do with his life. Yes.
Do you like get paid if you fight in the war?
Yes. Yes, you did. It wasn't very much, but you did get.
What if you die in the war?
If you die in the war, then they stop paying you. What were you? What were you trying to ask?
Yeah,
That's
I
it?
just wanted to know if maybe if you die, maybe your family gets you.
Oh, like a military pension or something? I don't know if those exist yet. I'm not sure if they exist now, but I don't know. At the time, I'm not sure if military pensions existed. I think you were just dead, unfortunately. Right. So after the war, he does that. He goes to war, and when he comes back, he is given a job spying on the German Workers' Party. And so, as I mentioned, in 1920, the situation is pretty tense. There's lots of political fighting. The government, people are trying to overthrow the government, and so the government has spies that they send out to sort of keep an eye on these sort of radical fringe parties to make sure they don't try to overthrow the government. And so Adolf gets a job spying on the German Workers' Party. So he joins it as a mole, as a spy for the German government. But very quickly he decides that, this little party could actually be his ticket to fame. And so he feels that he can very quickly put himself in place as leader of the German Workers' Party, and that he can steer this party where he wants it to go. And that's true. And so he kind of abandons his spy job, joins the German Workers' Party for real, and rebrands it as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. So again, he kind of finds his way into this political party because he's a spy, but he kind of changes his mind and then joins it for real and kind of makes it his own, because apparently from what he says, the party they weren't going anywhere, right? They had no leadership, they had no platform, they were a bunch of bozos, right? So Hitler decided that he could take this party where he wanted it to go. Um, that's a slide. I'll show you the Nazi platform later. So I'll come back to this slide. And I'll come back to this as well. And we've talked about that. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to watch a little bit of this documentary. And so it's called How Hitler Gained Absolute Power in Germany. There's a few questions that I'd like you to answer. I want you to keep your eyes out for some primary and secondary sources. I would like you to kind of do something like what the historians were doing in the section we just read, in that the historians were trying to figure out the most important factor in Hitler coming to power. Here I'd just like you to choose an event. So where's the turning point, right? Where's the event that really allows him to take complete power and do what he wants to do, okay? We can talk, after the documentary, we can talk a little bit about how Hitler uses nationalism, and is it stabilizing or destabilizing, which we've talked about before. And then if we have any evidence about how people felt about Hitler at the time, because we kind of all know how we feel about him now, but how did people view him back then, okay? So I've got 5 questions for you. What I'm going to do, yes, Alicia? No, Alicia? Aliana, sorry. I knew I was going to do that eventually. I knew I was going to call you by the wrong name, so I apologize. Aliana, what were you saying?
It's 4 questions.
It's what?
Only 4 questions.
Only 4 questions. Let me just pop this into Teams really quickly, and then we can watch. Aliana.
So I've heard something about Hitler. I don't know if that's right. They said that during the First World War he lost. He lost a testicle.
I guess it's possible. I don't remember hearing about that, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything. I don't remember ever reading. I don't remember ever reading anything about that. But again, it doesn't mean I'm not an expert on his testicles, which you're probably happy to know. So yeah. Let me know if you find anything on that. Okay, so don't type that into Google. Okay, so we've got 15. So let's watch 15 minutes of this, okay? Let's watch just 15 minutes. So online people, you'll see that it is, the questions and the link to the video are in Microsoft Teams. So watch 15 minutes of it and then come back here, okay? And we'll do the same thing. Say that one more time. We're back, by the way, everyone. Hello. Sorry. What?
So you did click on a bit like different parts to see what the video is about, and somewhere I think I saw it.
He's definitely in it, and he's definitely coming up. So online people, we're just having a discussion here about the fact that the video doesn't seem to discuss what I thought it was going to discuss, and I'm not sure if that's my mistake or not, or if it's just a badly titled video. But it does, I guess the video does kind of set the scene globally for what's happening, right? And so, you know, we do see that fascism is arising in other countries other than Germany. And we kind of knew that, right? Because we've talked about Mussolini, but fascism in Japan is rising. There's a fascist party in the UK, right? And so there are movements toward kind of authoritarianism that aren't just restricted to Germany, right? But they definitely take hold in Germany to a frightening degree. I think we can agree. So what we'll do is maybe we'll call it there. I will review this film later this afternoon and figure out what was actually going on. But I'll figure it out, and tomorrow we'll either watch more of it or we'll watch something else. But I will fix it for tomorrow. Online people, also recall that I've given you a 1-day extension on the paper, so you can hand it in to me by the end of day Wednesday. Email it to me in Word or in Pages, please and thank you. If you have any questions, you can message me, but I'm going to sign you off now. So good work today, and I'll see you tomorrow.